It's a pleasure to see you again, Garry Jacobs, for the closing of this virtual discussion. President and CEO of the World Academy of Art and Science, a thought leader and successful social scientist and a management consultant. This project has been one of your major babies, and we look forward to hearing from you a practical synthesis of the conference and what challenges are needed, what changes are needed, and what challenges are in front of us to break through in social progress. Over to you, Garry. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you so much for hosting this conference and partnering with the World Academy and all our partner organizations. Between the first two speakers, we've got quite a challenge in front of us. Jane, it reminds me of when I was a student at Berkeley in the 60s. Already you were talking about what needs to change in the world. And it's very inspiring to hear you so passionately and eloquently laying out to us, in fact, the real changes we need in the world today. We've got a system that's broken, as it's been said, and we've got challenges of monumental proportion. And we have to make changes of such a magnitude in such a short time that has never occurred in the history of the world up until now. And at the same time, we've heard from Fabrizio Hochschild that when he's gone around the world and polled more than 1 million people, that people in all areas of all stakeholder groups, in all ages, occupations tell us we need a change in our multilateral system. So the question arises, the question that we're all asking ourselves is, who's going to do this? We know we have to do this. The logic of this is imperative. It's inevitable. But how are we going to get it done? How are we going to change the multilateral system that's governed by its owners, who are nation states, who are actually more accurately the governments of nation states, who get elected by addressing the popular will of their people for what they want at home, not the will of humanity or the world at large? How are we going to change our multilateral system to make it effective on such an urgent basis with such a magnitude of challenges? How are we going to make the UN we want, the UN we need, as Fabrizio has said? When we started this project with UNOG a little more than a year ago, we understood that the challenges confronting humanity today were really unprecedented. We talked about many of these back in 2013 in Geneva with the UN in our first conference, and about the magnitude of the changes possible. How are we going to do it is the question, and where can we make a beginning? We're already, many beginnings are there, but where can we jumpstart this? How can we accelerate this? How can we release the energy and momentum needed for it? I think one of the fundamental assumptions and premises behind this conference is we can't do it by expecting somebody else to do it. We can't do it by expecting the UN system as it is today, which is bound on all sides by its member states and the restrictions and limitations, even just to pull out a budget if anybody does something that's a little out of line. We can't do it based on sole reliance on our national governments, which after all, we have elected. We're going to need to do something else. And in the course of this study, we understood that redefining the multilateral system means not just redefining the way the UN works, not just redefining the way the nation states work in cooperation with each other, but the way we as humanity work. We as a multi-stakeholder global society, from all occupations in all fields of life and all ages, we are the people, and it's going to be we who have to define the way we want the world in future and the way our multilateral system has to work. And how do we give the support necessary the Secretary General is asking us? How do we make the UN and the multilateral system more inclusive, more equitable, more empowered to the multiple stakeholders who have a very limited voice and a very even more limited power in the society today? In working with the UN the last 1 year, I have no doubt about the sincerity of those who are leading this organization, but they can't do it themselves. They need our help. They need our help means they need the help of the whole civil society, the whole voice of humanity. We need an approach that takes a global perspective, not just the perspective of particular countries or vested interests of particular professional groups or business organizations or anything, or age groups for that matter. We need something that's going to not be done by specialists, but it's going to look at things from a multidisciplinary perspective that's going to involve all the stakeholders and all the voices. And we're going to need to do something that builds trust in our institutions, which has been depreciated so much, not just at the national level, in our media, in business, in the international organizations as well, in science itself, which is under siege at this time. How are we going to build that? We're going to have to find strategy for that. And that was the rationale behind this project, to create this, what we call GL21, or the global leadership in the 21st century, not as an organization that comes up with all the answers, but as a platform, as a forum for open debate, to invite the best thinking on what we can do to jumpstart this process. We've involved more than 350 experts, more than 70 partner organizations, about 20 events over the last 8 months, and a lot has emerged. A tremendous amount has emerged. It's only a beginning. We understood when we started this, when we talk about leadership, we're talking about the kind of leadership that exemplifies aspirations, that's constructive, not pessimistic, not blaming somebody else for who's responsible or where the buck stops, that's going to take responsibility to make the changes needed, that is creative, that's adventurous, that starts with right thinking and then translates that into action. As Jane said, we face unprecedented multidimensional challenges today. The irony is, though, at the same time, that we're seeing a willingness for change, which we have not seen in decades. We're seeing absolutely what she said about the neoliberalism has to go, that the government taboo on debt, especially debt if it's going to be for the benefit of the masses, if it's going to be debt for the benefit of the wealthy, that's different. The top 1% or something, that's different. This is all old philosophy, and it's not even science. It's an orthodoxy to support the established what exists today. And we've got to have the courage and honesty to challenge it at its roots. And that's why we start with thought. That's why we start with the theory. That's why we founded 10 years ago a new economic theory group to challenge these ideas. It's funny, isn't it, that when the 2008 financial crisis came, suddenly debt didn't matter. Quantitative easing created $10 trillion in the US alone. Because, why? We had to bail out the wealthy financial institutions where all the wealthy investors had their money. Funny thing, all the theory was just brushed aside again. But then when that crisis was, even though we still had high unemployment, it took 5 years in the US to get the unemployment rate down to a reasonable rate. But as soon as that happened, we got to go back to debt management and everything. And then again, what happened this year? When the economy is at stake. It's not the economy of the masses. It's not the economy of everybody. Enough people have lost their homes, and hundreds of thousands, millions have lost their jobs. And worldwide, it's about almost 200 million have lost their jobs. What happened to the philosophy then? What happened to the necessity now that we now have people rationally looking and saying, we can double the amount of debt in the US itself. provided that we're not doing it to bail out the past, which is simply unviable, but we're doing it to invest in the future. What do we call it when we borrow money and we invest in their future? We call it investment. We call it asset building. And what are we investing in now? We're investing in the planet. We're investing in the future of our children. We're investing in the education necessary. We're investing in creating jobs for people who really need them. And yesterday we had a wonderful session on employment, providing all the information that shows it's more costly to the society to have an unemployed person than to pay them to work. In terms of crime, in terms of healthcare problems, mental problems, judiciary system, drug problems, and everything else, it's more costly. And what is the cost of leaving a human resource unutilized? How do we measure that? A person who's not allowed to develop, who's not given the opportunities to develop their knowledge, to develop skills and express them in productive work for their own sake. How do we measure that wastefulness? We need a new type of accounting and all. But how are we going to start this? That's the question. And that's what we tried to address in this conference. We tried to address how do we give the leadership necessary to go beyond what was done so far. And we don't have to start from scratch. 5 years ago, we had a remarkable example of leadership in the founding and the formulation of the SDGs, an unprecedented act in the history of humanity. And it took us back to another great act of visionary leadership in 1948, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was framed. At a time when no nation state was willing to sign on the dotted line and say, we're going to enforce these rights, and we're going to empower law to enforce these rights. But it was an act of leadership, of visionary leadership, led by Eleanor Roosevelt and others, to get them down. And those rights have now become goals. And formulating those rights and formulating those goals were great acts of leadership and power. When we talk about leadership, we usually think of inspiring individuals, and we've had good examples today of why we do that. A fiery global activist who's dedicated decades not only to outstanding professional accomplishment, but for helping humanity and helping save this planet. And in the last session, a youngster, Caucasian Basu, who at the age of 12 was elected as global coordinator for UNEP for children and youth, and founded Green Hope Foundation at the age of 16. And in the last 5 years, she's done more public service to the world than most of us have in a lifetime. This is leadership, and certainly we need those inspiring, dedicated, passionate, fiery, courageous individuals. But we need more than that. We need all types of leadership. We need not only the person, but we need the organizations that lead. 1945, the UN and UNESCO were founded. Followed quickly the World Bank, UNDP, WHO, World Food Program, UNEP, UNIFEM, and the youngest of the UN agencies, the Young UN, Agents for Change in 2016. Founding new organizations, creative organizations, has always been a great step in leadership. The Royal Society was the first National Academy of Science in the world, founded in England in 1660. By coincidence, or in 1960, the World Academy of Art and Science was founded by very eminent people who were members of all the academies around the world, because they realized national academies are not enough. We've got to be looking and working on behalf of the whole world and not just at the national level. Organizations of all descriptions, like the National Dairy Development Board, which took India to make it the largest dairy producing country in the world within 5 years, or Grameen Bank, which spread out created microcredit as a global institution after that, or the IPCC that was founded by the UN and headed for many years by one of our fellows, Rajendra Pachauri, Ash Pachuri's father, and then created the POP movement. So organizations are important. We need strategies, effective, dynamic strategies. They can also lead, like the Green Revolution, which doubled the food production in India in 10 years and turned a food deficit, famine-based country into a food self-sufficient country, even in the first 5. We need leadership in the form of plans, like the Marshall Plan was a leading key determinant after World War II. We need leadership in the form of systems and platforms, like the online learning systems like edX and Coursera that were started in the last decade and now give us a head start in moving ahead. We need programs like the school's nutritional programs, and we need new measures and indicators of development like UNDP's Human Development Index, which was started in the late 80s. And now we have the ESGs today, which are really making an impact on investing, and so forth. We need reports like the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth and the films like The Inconvenient Truth, and movements like Occupy Wall Street, Me Too, Black Lives, Sunrise, Fridays for Future, Fire Drill Fridays, POP movement, and others. So this is the background for what we had in mind when we started this project with David and the Director General, Tatiana Valovaya. And we have found in our discussions with you ideas, pregnant ideas, powerful strategies that can help us do this in many different ways. In terms of goals, we had our finance group saying we have to make sustainable finance the 18th SDG. We've got to go around and indicate the way we use our finance itself has got to be one of the critical goals. And that same group has just released a report at the conference yesterday, a completely new report for the first time. The 30 largest among the 30 largest financial institutions in the world have reported how they're spending their money now, how they're investing their money, worth about $100 trillion in total every year, and measured, these companies have revealed to us the data on how far they are actually employing it for ESG, for environment, for society, for governance guidelines. And they're the first to say that it's not all of their money, that they've still got stuff going to the fossil fuels, and they've got to change that, and they've got to shift it more and more. And this is only the beginning. And they want to release this data as a call to their colleagues in other companies, in hundreds of other top financial companies in the world, and asking them, put up your data, show us what you're doing, show the investors what you're doing, and live up and rise up to the role that finance has to play in this economy. Jane spoke about jobs. We had a wonderful session on employment, on the need for job guarantee programs. And we've been studying that it's in this project for years. And we had wonderful testimony from experts, I think beyond a question. We need to and can finance to create jobs for everybody who needs one until the private economy takes over and absorbs them themselves. And the countries will be better off for it financially, will be much better off for it socially, in terms of health, in terms of our democracy. This is a win-win situation, and it's time to be looking at it. It's not a new idea. FDR was looking at it in the early 40s. They were talking about it in 1945. Now is the time has come that we can act on it. We need plans. We had a Marshall Plan. Now, yesterday we heard the Planetary Emergency Plan produced by Club of Rome with more than 300 other organizations, and the 10 commitments they see are necessary to really manage not just the climate issue, but the problem of economic inequality, which Jane mentioned, and the problem of governance and democratic inclusion that we need. We need new organizations. We need to reorganize our educational research, our scientific research, to break down the disciplinary barriers and get integrated approaches to policy making, to formulation of strategies, and of course to implementation. We discussed it this morning. We need strategies to handle the food problem, which we discussed yesterday, which has reached a critical stage because of the pandemic and is likely to continue, throwing hundreds of millions of people into greater vulnerability and nutritional deficiency now. One of the strategies we talked about many was focusing on regional and national buffer stocks to compensate for the market failures, that whenever there's a short reduction in food production, we have a shocking rise in prices, and who loses the most from that, of course, are those who can least afford to pay more for food. Least afford food. We know the strategies, they're well documented, and they work. We need innovative financial products. We've talked about green bonds for the private and many other new instruments that are being created in the private sector, but we also talked, and we have a project in the academy on this, and it's being listened to very seriously by central banks around the world, creating digital currencies just to finance the SDGs. It's fully feasible, it's affordable, and it will give us the money we need to invest in the future. We'll be investing, and I don't mean just in climate, I mean in the educational system we need. All the research of UNESCO shows that we got an increasing deficit in our capacity to offer higher education to the younger generations who need it. And the cost of higher education in the US is also already so exorbitant, the average student, not even before they graduate, has got a debt of $30,000 or more. $1.6 trillion in the US alone. We're supposed to be supporting and investing in the next generation and giving them what they need for the future. What could be a more valuable investment? And we can do it. And that's not enough. It's not just a question of money. Even if we had all the money we needed to multiply the number of universities to create a new university the size of Harvard every day of the week for the next 15, 20 years, we wouldn't have the teachers for it. We wouldn't have the quality of educators needed for that. We've got to also think of a global delivery system that can deliver the best quality education to the most at a fraction of the cost of what we have now. And that's one of the favors that the COVID has done. It's forced the universities out of this fear and resistance to the online learning. And I'm not saying that the online should completely replace the classroom learning, but it's forced us to recognize that we can't afford this model anymore. It simply can't meet the needs of humanity. And so we've talked about, with experts, we've talked about, if you simply did one thing, if we separated certification for education from delivery of education, we would open up the field of education to vast resources, retired professors, people from industry and other fields and professions who are willing and eager to lend their knowledge. And it's the certification institutions that would tell who has the knowledge. And this is already happening. It's happening in the US, it's happening in the UK. The companies themselves are saying, we don't want your degree. We want to see that you're developed as a person with the skills necessary, and your diploma doesn't tell us that you're that person. So these are forms of leadership. They're innovative approaches to leadership. And of course, we need, as Jane represents and POP and others here, the youth represent, we need social movements, multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral movements that bring us together rather than dividing us and competing with each other. I mean the 350 experts and the 70 partners have contributed rich ideas. We could only touch on a few of them here, and we'll be working on them to refine them based on the wonderful feedback and input we've got from the experts in this conference, and coming out with a final report. One part of this project we also agreed on is whatever are our learnings from this project, we will convert it into educational material, higher educational, and then we'll see at other levels So, because how are we going to prepare the global leaders of the future if we don't take advantage of the latest knowledge we have of what we need to do and know and be different than what we've been learning and what we learned when we went through the educational system? We've got a few more events coming up. Tomorrow, there's an event on lesson of the pandemics in the post-COVID world. What will it be like? Moscow State University, we're partnering on this issue on December 22nd. It's all on our website. We've got, and then a final report. Finally, I'd like to thank the Director General, Tatiana Valovaya, David Chikvidze. You've been a fabulous partners with us, your whole team at UNOG, who have been so professional. You have kept us running and to rise to the standard. And we've learned a lot in the process of what professionalism is in international diplomacy. And my team is grateful for the education that you've given us there. The moderators for these sessions, the panelists, the 100+ fellows of the World Academy who have participated in the project, and hundreds of other experts, not only our 70 partner organizations, but more than 1,000, we haven't been able to count all of them on social media and all, but more than 1,000 participants in the events. And we're not done yet. We want your inputs. We want your ideas. We want your suggestions. This is a platform. We don't claim to have all the answers. We're asking the difficult questions. We want to hear your answers, and we'll try to process and work on as many of them as we can. And we want your partnership. We need it, because multilateralism, the redefined multilateralism that's really inclusive, means it includes all of us. And it includes every organization that can contribute in every field, at every age, even all of us. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you who have participated by your contributions, by your questions, by your listening, and we look forward to working with you in future. Thank you.
Garry, thank you very much. Your statement is so rich, I don't even know which part to thank you for first and how to continue. But I'll thank you for the kind words toward the UN, really rare commodity these days. Thank you very much. We're 75 years after the founding of the United Nations and 60 years after the World Academy of Art and Science was established. And it is indeed time to implement new recommendations for the way forward, including for the United Nations. And thank you. Between Ms. Fonda and your statement, I think you've charted a lot of the directions in which not only what needs to be done, but how to do it. And thank you very much for that.